The Call of Duty games, there's a lot of them. This year, 2024, Black Ops 6 came out. And it reminded me about something that I've been thinking about for a while, which is, where is this series going at this point? It's a series that started as a whole bunch of World War II games, then it became Modern Warfare, then it became Black Ops, then it had the occasional World War II game entry again. Then it went into the future, then it went back to Modern Warfare, then it continued on with Black Ops, and it still gets the occasional World War II entry. Call of Duty has been through a lot, and there's a fair amount of people who think the games have been exhausted for a very long time. However, I personally think that where we are right now is the most interesting place Call of Duty has been in for years. With this video, I want to explain my own somewhat overcomplicated way of looking at this series of games, and explain why I have difficulty seeing what the future of Call of Duty is going to be. On a side note, I want to discuss the series' depictions of weapons and weapon attachments, and how that has changed as the series has gone on in a way that I find to be very interesting. Finally, I want to add that I'm not going to talk about any of the sort of smaller offshoot titles like the PS Vita entries or anything like that, or Call of Duty Mobile. I'm going to focus on the main big titles. Neither is this a discussion about lore or characters or even really story. But let's just get started. In order to best explain what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to present it to you via this graph that I made. Now, keep in mind, I don't know much about graphic design. As a matter of fact, I don't know anything about it. So this won't be looking like something out of a folding ideas video. The Call of Duty series started as World War II games. That was the series' identity for years, and honestly, I don't really have much to say about it. Personally, I have never been that into World War II games, and what I'm mainly interested in talking about for this video is what Call of Duty becomes after Call of Duty 4, so I'll just skip ahead till Modern Warfare, the original. This is when Call of Duty started to branch out into different time periods and settings for almost every single entry. Of course, we had Modern Warfare, which was Modern Warfare of its day. What is Modern Warfare back then, or what was Modern Warfare back then, isn't necessarily exactly like Modern Warfare now, of course, but nonetheless. And after that, we had World at War, and that kind of marks a little bit of the trend that Call of Duty will still get the occasional World War II entry. Now, the time between World at War and the next World War II game, which was just called World War II, is pretty long, but nonetheless there is an undercurrent to the series of having just a new World War II game now and again. So Modern Warfare, then World at War, then Modern Warfare 2, which of course goes ahead in time a little bit to the Modern Warfare of its year when it came out, which isn't that far into the future relative to the original Modern Warfare. Then we get Black Ops, and now we're seeing that additional timeline split. Now Call of Duty is Modern Warfare, it is World War II, and it is general Cold War shenanigans, with the first Black Ops primarily being a Vietnam game. After Black Ops, there's Modern Warfare 3, and again, that's just Modern Warfare continuing on with what it's doing.
We're gonna have one shot to grab the president before he gives up the launch codes, and Makarov turns Europe into glass.
Then we have Black Ops 2. Black Ops 2 is where we see Call of Duty begin with just sort of flirting with a future setting, with a sci-fi setting. But it's also a game that takes place between two different timelines within the game itself. You have the past settings that take place in around the late 80s, and then you have the future settings, which takes place in 2025, so next year. But this is where we see the start of the future sci-fi settings, though it hasn't yet gone quite as far as it will in the, future. And after Black Ops 2, we of course have Ghosts. Now, Ghosts is a kind of a weird one. I personally see it almost as a form of like Modern Warfare 4, because of the fact that it's arguably like just Modern Warfare as far as the weapons and technology that you see in the game. By far the most futuristic thing about it would be the space battles, and they are still, I guess you could say, more realistic than the stuff that you see in Infinite Warfare, though I don't know exactly how realistic the stuff that happens in Ghosts actually would be. But either way, it is basically a modern day setting, and I see it as the kind of last gasp, the last sort of entry of that era of Call of Duty. So the period between the original Modern Warfare up until Ghosts is what I see personally as the classic era of Call of Duty. Now I have to explain a little bit about this era stuff that I'm talking about. When I talk about eras of Call of Duty, I'm thinking about it from my own personal, very subjective definition of it. This is just based on how I personally see these games, and it's not an official thing in any way, nothing from a wiki or Activision or whoever. And some people might find it odd that I would call the Modern Warfare till Ghosts as the classic era. More people might say that the World War II era is the classic era. But the reason that I call these different eras these things is really just because of the fact that I never grew up with those World War II games, but I did with those original Modern Warfare games and Black Ops games. So it's just a very subjective, kind of nostalgic way of defining at least those two eras. And this brings us into the most controversial Call of Duty era, the future era. And it starts with Advanced Warfare, which is Call of Duty trying to be a little bit like Titanfall, which is ironic if you consider the history of the studio that makes Titanfall. And it introduced a bunch of fancy stuff, wall running, exoskeletons, general future-y guns and technology and robots and so on.
What you're seeing is Advanced Warfare.
And after that there was Black Ops 3, which said, we do even more of that now. Even more future, even more robots, even more sci-fi tech, just more of it. And all of this culminates with Infinite Warfare. Probably the most hated out of all the future entries, as it basically said, fuck it, we're just sci-fi now. It's just sci-fi, it's space, spaceships, also robots and wall running, but just full-on sci-fi game. It was widely hated even before it came out, having the most downvoted video in YouTube history, at least at that point. And people didn't really like it when it actually came out. Though I want to come into defense of the game just a little bit. Because I don't think the game has a very good multiplayer. It's pretty shitty. Zombies, just okay, though I never really liked zombies in the COD games that much. But the single player is genuinely really, really good. The game is just a really fun sci-fi shooter adventure that has some really cool levels and just amazing set pieces. If it is on a sale or something, I would really recommend buying it just for playing the single player. It's that good. After all this, we get Call of Duty World War II, which is not a very clever title. And this game is of course very different from every other game in this future era. When World War II came out, there hadn't been a new World War II game for almost 10 years. And the way that I view these World War II games is that they are a category of their own within Call of Duty's broader existence. What I mean is that there will be the occasional World War II entry, whilst the rest of the series experiments with different things, different eras and time periods. So the rest of the series can be doing sort of just new experimentations and shifting around a lot. The World War II games will exist as an undercurrent, where it will be like, you know, if you want a new World War II game, hey, here's one that comes out from time to time. In that sense, the World War II era never really ended, it just slowed down with way fewer entries relative to how it was back in before the original Modern Warfare. After all this, we get the somewhat unceremonious end to all this with Black Ops 4. Black Ops 4 is somewhat similar to Ghosts in it being the kind of last gasp of that era, but beyond that there really isn't that much to say about it. Okay, there's one notable thing about Black Ops 4. It was the first Call of Duty to take a shot at the Battle Royale mode. Or Royale, I don't know.
Royale with cheese. Royale with cheese.
Either way, it really didn't leave much of an impression, so let's just move on. So, with all of this history now behind us, we enter the era that I find to truly be the most interesting and the messy era of Call of Duty. And it starts with Call of Duty Modern Warfare again. Though I will call it Modern Warfare 2019 from this point onward to just make it clear which game I'm talking about. What Modern Warfare 2019 did was to go back into Call of Duty's own past. This continuous movement into the future that the series has done since the original Modern Warfare was now stopped. It was pretty much just them admitting that, well, okay, we get it. People don't like the future stuff, so, well, people like Modern Warfare, so here's more Modern Warfare. Okay, they kinda said that with World War II, but Modern Warfare 2019 was the game that really made that case. And it is a great game, I personally really like it. It also saw a shift where they tried to move towards a more sort of grounded and sort of tactical image at least. In reality, it's really not very realistic, but it tries to have a face of realism in a way that no previous Call of Duty game quite has had. Especially a lot of gun nerds like the level of detail that were on the weapons and weapon animations. Again, this was something that was pretty new for the series. It was approaching a level of detail that no previous game really had ever done. So, after Modern Warfare 2019, we get Black Ops Cold War. Now, Black Ops Cold War is interesting because of the fact that it still retains some of that older pre-Modern Warfare 2019 feel in its just general gameplay. And it was also a movement forward for the Black Ops series within its own timeline. As I mentioned earlier, Black Ops 2 is technically set in the 1980s for the past segments, but Black Ops Cold War is the real 80s game, so to speak. And you can see this in the game's general aesthetic and how it was marketed with a bunch of remixes of 80s songs, but also in the way that the whole game, the whole package is focused on the 1980s. Black Ops 2 was of course entirely focused on the future setting in the multiplayer, whilst Black Ops Cold War has the 80s setting for, well, the single player, but also the multiplayer and zombies as well. But what we're seeing now here with Cold War is that the Black Ops series is progressively moving closer and closer towards a modern day setting. And on a gameplay level, primarily with the weapons, it is arguably a modern day setting, but more on that later. But to break all of this up, we of course have another World War II game with Call of Duty Vanguard. And yep, it's more World War II. Now, really, the main thing I actually wanted to talk about when it comes to this game is its depiction of weapons and weapon attachments. It has an almost absurd level of anachronism when it comes to the weapon attachments. And once again, I will mainly talk about this in the later section. So let's just move onward to Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 Part 2. Now, as far as setting goes, it's just more Modern Warfare. It follows up on Modern Warfare 2019 and it doesn't really feel significantly different in that area. But beyond this timeline stuff, I feel like this sort of revival, the sort of energy that came from that with Modern Warfare 2019 already had started to wane with Modern Warfare 2 Part 2. It just felt like, yep, it's a follow-up to 2019, it's fine. I mean, I personally think it was pretty decent, more so than Modern Warfare 3, but it just didn't feel special in that way that Modern Warfare 2019 did. And I can't entirely fault the developers for that, because, well, you can't really follow it up with just more of that revival after all. But still, you definitely feel it, and it puts the game, I think, in a little bit of a weird spot. And what follows after this is Modern Warfare 3 Part 2, which was maybe not a very good game. There aren't too many interesting things to say about this game. One thing I thought was kind of interesting though, is that Modern Warfare 3 Part 2 is directly following up Modern Warfare 2 Part 2. Because if you look back at the previous Modern Warfare entries, the original series, then you obviously have Modern Warfare, but then it was World at War, Modern Warfare 2, then there was Black Ops, then Modern Warfare 3, and so on. there was always this kind of break in between. But now they decided to just immediately go for Modern Warfare 3 after 2, which is maybe interesting? I don't really know. The second thing about this game is that really it just feels like DLC. And ever since the original Modern Warfare 2, I'd say, people have been sort of complaining about the series and saying that like, whoa, every entry into the series is just like DLC, which I never really agreed with. But this time around for Modern Warfare 3 Part 2, yeah, it's pretty much true. It is basically just DLC. But that's basically the only thing that I have to say about that game. And finally, we're here at the game that really pushed me into making this video, which is Call of Duty Black Ops 6. The setting for Black Ops 6 is the early 90s, and this is what makes the game so interesting. Up to this point, if we're not counting the future settings, the Black Ops games have been moving through decades. It's been the 60s, sort of the 70s, 80s, and now the 90s. If we're getting another Black Ops game, and if it does another decade jump forward, that would put the game in the early 2000s. That would mean that the Black Ops games have caught up to where the original Modern Warfare games were set. The first Modern Warfare game came out in 2007, but it is set in 2011. In any sense of gameplay and setting, it's based on an image of military conflict of 2007 and earlier, however. If the next Black Ops game were to be set in the 2000s, it would probably be earlier in the decade, in the year 2000 or around there. That's technically not exactly the same as Modern Warfare, but it's so close that any difference would be so minor it wouldn't really be noticeable. There's a lot of ifs here, of course. But it's crazy to me that Call of Duty via Black Ops could end up catching up to itself in that way. Because where else do they have to go? The incredibly negative reaction towards a far future setting makes it unlikely that they would go for that again. They have already done the past that isn't World War II, since that is after all its own thing. Maybe they could do a slight future jump? Black Ops 2 is after all considered to be one of the best games in the series. When the game came out in 2011, then 2025 was fairly far off in the future. So maybe we'll see a Black Ops 2042. The reason I call this era of Call of Duty recursive is because COD have come back on itself, and we're now at a point where it seems like they have painted themselves into a corner. Before Modern Warfare 2019, there was an interest from the developers in pushing these games into a sci-fi future, but people largely hated it, so they decided to go back into something many people wanted more of. But now that is once again exhausted. Modern Warfare feels stale and aimless. Black Ops have gone through all the war greatest hits from after World War II and before Modern Warfare, and the World War II games are barely even trying to feel like World War II games. Though of course how much Call of Duty has ever tried to feel like World War II is debatable. So what else is there? Obviously the series could go anywhere, but only if there was a willingness from the developers in truly trying something new. And that willingness is constrained by the public expectation of what a Call of Duty game is. You could make a COD game set in the American Civil War, but would people really want that? Would that really fit with how these games work at this point? I personally don't think so. One conflict I think the games could try and depict would be the Korean War. If anything, because there are so few games that tackle that war. As a matter of fact, I can't think of a single game set in the Korean War, though I'm sure there are some out there. But maybe all this focus on what era a COD game takes place in isn't that important anymore. As we've seen with Black Ops 6, there is clearly a creative force within all the studios that work on these games to make something different. The campaign for Black Ops 6 has so many unique ideas that have never been done before to this extent in a Call of Duty game. Maybe it doesn't really matter if the 2000s get repeated if a fresh and more creative approach to it gets made. Then again, the vast majority of that is seen in the single player, and the Call of Duty games are primarily about their multiplayer. If that creativity doesn't extend into the multiplayer, then it really doesn't matter. There is of course also the question of how closely Call of Duty actually attempts to emulate the era it takes place in. And this leads into the topic I have put off until now: weapons and weapon attachments in these games. Call of Duty is a shooter. The primary gameplay consists of shooting stuff with a gun. So when Call of Duty is going for one setting or another, What weapons they decide to put in the game and how they choose to depict them is going to be the primary way the games reflect that era. But as we have seen with these games, they have become more and more ridiculous in how they depict these weapons. And that is mainly noticed in the Black Ops and especially World War II games. Putting a bunch of cool attachments on your gun in a Modern Warfare or future setting is fine. It's a fairly accurate depiction of how modular guns are nowadays or will be in the future, I guess. But when you take that system back in time, it starts chafing real bad against the setting. And it's something that has only gotten worse as the weapon mod system has gotten more complex. A lot of the attachments in the Black Ops games don't fit in the time periods the games take place in. Especially in the first Black Ops, you're running around with guns that have red dot sights on them that wouldn't exist for decades after that game takes place. Along with weapons like the G11 or SPAS-12 that didn't exist back in the 60s either. It's pretty rough, especially in Cold War and Black Ops 6, where the larger amount of mods in comparison to the first game, the first Black Ops game that is, brings in even more kinds of tech that just didn't exist yet. However, all of this culminates in the comically out-of-place weapon mods of Vanguard. Having what are basically compact electronic sights and AFGs made out of bent metal feels ridiculous and fits even worse with the time period than the mods in Black Ops, even if both are pretty wrong. So how did it turn out this way? There are several reasons for it, I think. What the original Modern Warfare really made popular in multiplayer shooters was weapon attachments. It wasn't the first game to do it, but it was the big game that became an inspiration for so many other multiplayer games to have similar sorts of weapon customization systems. And it has become basically a requirement for a Call of Duty game to have a weapon mod system, even if it doesn't really make sense. An alternative Vanguard that released without the weapon mod system, or at least a heavily reduced one, would probably have seen a negative reaction from a more casual audience, as it wouldn't meet their expectations of gun customizations in a Call of Duty game. A game like World at War avoided most of these issues since it came out right after Modern Warfare. At that point, the mod system was not very complex, only allowing one attachment per gun, and not all guns had mods. World at War still had weapon mods, but they fit the setting much better since it wasn't so expansive yet. Vanguard, however, released post Modern Warfare 2019, where the amount of weapon mods available, but also the amount that you can put on a single weapon, was higher than ever before. I do also believe that the reason the mod system works the way it does in Vanguard is so that the weapons would actually be competitive in Warzone. Since every weapon from each new Call of Duty entry now has to be jammed into Warzone, they also have to be at least somewhat useful in that mode. If all those World War II guns only had a realistic choice for the era of attachments available, then very few of them would be useful against the more modern weapons. The way to make them useful is to create a bunch of 1940s red dots and rail attachments and hope no one thinks about it too much. That works in a gameplay sense, but looks and feels ridiculous. I am aware that Warzone doesn't really take place in World War II, which could maybe explain weapon mod selection. However, that distinction would only make sense if those mods were only present in Warzone and not a specific multiplayer mode from Vanguard, which they do. The reason all of this bothers me isn't because it isn't historically accurate or whatever. Well, maybe that bothers me a little bit. The main reason I see this as an issue is that it homogenizes the gameplay in Call of Duty to essentially make them all feel like Modern Warfare in one way or another. Taking a step back into the past, especially World War II, and actually trying to stick to the technology of those eras would give the different games a more distinct feel and in turn make the series as a whole feel more diverse. You can have all the souped up guns and movements of the game set in a modern setting, but when you go back to World War II, that could be an opportunity to change the pace around. Make players think at least somewhat differently how they use the weapons in game and approach combat. But instead what we get are games that all try to be a modern setting even when they are set in the past. World War II becomes a weird LARP where you are using essentially 21st century tech with no explanation for why. If they were going for some kind of Wolfenstein type of alternative history, it could be interesting. But instead it's supposed to be World War II, but also not at the same time. Not in any gameplay sense at least.
Shoot the hinges!
On a side note, something interesting we have been seeing with Modern Warfare 3 Part 2 is that they have been adding a bunch of much more futuristic weapons to the game, most notably a few weapons from Advanced Warfare. While this might just be the developers adding a bunch of guns because they think they are cool and nothing more, I do wonder if it's hinting at what the next Call of Duty will be. Could it be a test run, so to speak, for a potential Advanced Warfare 2? And there we go, my overindulgent video about the Call of Duty timeline. I've been wanting to do something like this for a while now, and it feels pretty good to actually have something made. I will admit at this point I am kind of tired of thinking about Call of Duty, as I have been thinking about these games and playing them and watching them in all their forms for months now. But overall, it's been a pretty fun time, and I also hope that you found this video interesting. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.